Picture a parking lot at 2 in the morning, sometime around 1974. Everything on the street is dark. Every store, every window, every sign, all of it black, except one building on the corner, glowing pink and orange, the only light for blocks. Inside, a guy in a paper hat is dropping rings of dough into hot oil while a cop leans on the counter, waiting on a fresh apple fritter. If you grew up out west, you don't have to imagine any of that. You lived it. That was Winchells. Not Dunkin', not Krispy Kreme, a donut chain out of Southern California, and at its peak there were almost 1,000 of them. A lot of them open, all night, every night. So here's the question I want to sit with for the next little while. If it was that big, and you can still smell it right now just from me describing it, why is it that most of you haven't set foot in one in 30 years? Here's the strange part. The one thing that made this company unstoppable is the exact same thing that ended up killing it. And by the time it was over, you couldn't even point to a single killer. 3 separate forces each took a little. I'm going to hand you all 3 like pieces of evidence, and you'll see the whole thing coming long before the people running it did. Let's get into it. To understand how big Winchells got, you have to go back to a guy who was, by his own honest admission, not much of a success at anything yet. His name was Vern Winchell. Born in Illinois in 1915, moved out to California with his family when he was 9, and before donuts, he tried a couple of things that did not make him rich. He sold jukeboxes. He sold used cars. Neither one turned into much of anything. Here's the part that always gets me. Winchell didn't even set out to sell donuts. He owned a little piece of commercial property, and he was planning to put up a drive-in hamburger stand. Classic post-war California move. Burgers, a car full of teenagers, a paper bag of fries. But right as he's getting going, somebody opens the exact same kind of burger stand directly across the street from his. So now he's stuck. Same idea, same street, already beaten to it. And a friend leans over and tells him the thing that changes his entire life. Skip the burgers. Sell donuts. The margins are incredible. It's basically flour, sugar, oil, and water. And you sell it hot for a nickel. So Winchell scraped together $27,000, turned that property into a donut shop, and on October 8th, 1948, the very first Winchell's Donut House opened in Temple City, California. Coffee cost a dime. A donut cost a nickel. And Winchell did one thing right away that turned a snack into a show. He put the whole operation right up against the window. You could stand out on the sidewalk and watch the dough drop into the oil, flip over, puff up, and come out gold. Kids pressed their faces against that glass. That was the marketing. There wasn't any other marketing. And in that first little shop, Vern Winchell figured out the one thing that would run the rest of his life. People don't just want the donut. They want to watch it be fresh. They want to know the light is on and something warm is coming out right now. This minute. For them. Winchells was never really selling donuts. It was selling the light. Hold on to that, because it built an empire, and it's also the murder weapon. It worked immediately. The very next year, 1949, he opened 2 more shops in Huntington Park and Southgate. Then 2 or 3 a year through the early 50s. In 1953, he set up a real headquarters and a donut mix plant over in Alhambra so that every single shop tasted exactly the same no matter which one you walked into. By the early 60s, this thing is a machine. The stock starts trading. He pushes into Arizona, into Colorado, up into the Pacific Northwest. He starts franchising, opening 30 and 40 shops a year. In 1964, he adds the apple fritter, this craggy, glazed, hand-sized monster of a thing, and it becomes the signature. Ask anybody over 50 what they used to get at Winchells, and a whole lot of them are going to say the fritter without even having to think about it. It got so hot, so fast, that in 1966 the United Fruit Company, the banana giant, offered $19 million to buy the whole chain. And the deal fell apart at the very last minute. Winchell held on to his donuts. By 1967, sales crossed $7.5 million. And then comes the move that looks like a triumph in the moment, and turns out to be the first of our three guns. In 1968, Winchells merges with Denny's, the coffee shop chain. It's a stock swap worth almost $30 million. At that point, Winchells has 255 shops, and Vern Winchell doesn't just cash out and disappear, he ends up running the whole combined company. A few years later, he's the chairman and chief executive of Denny's itself. Circle that merger. That's gun number one up on the wall, and it's going to sit there loaded for years before it goes off. But before we get to how it all comes apart, I want you to actually stand inside one of these places for a second, because if you were around in the 60s or the 70s, especially anywhere out west, you already know this feeling in your body. It's late. Maybe you're a cop on the graveyard shift, killing an hour. Maybe you're a teenager who should already be home. Maybe your dad just wanted somewhere to go at 6 in the morning before anybody else in the house was awake, and he took you along. And there's the sign, that Winchells pink and orange, glowing in the dark, open when nothing else on the whole street is open. Inside, the smell hits you before the door even shuts. Coffee, hot oil, and sugar. The donuts are right there behind the glass, fresh, not sitting in some sad plastic case since yesterday. You've got the whole lineup in front of you. The apple fritter, the buttermilk bar, the maple bar, the glazed old-fashioned, the jelly stick you weren't allowed to get but got anyway. You order a dozen, and they hand you 14, because a Winchells dozen was 14, not 12, and everybody just knew that. They tuck them in with a sheet of wax tissue, hand you a coffee in a styrofoam cup, and you carry that pink box out to the car. And for a minute, at 2 in the morning, everything in the world is fine. That was the product, not the donut. It was the open door, and the light that never went off. Same thing that killed it, but we'll get there. So how big did the light get? Bigger than almost anybody remembers. Through the 1970s, Winchells just kept climbing. This is the golden age, the top of the mountain. They grow to around 1,000 shops. Revenue by most estimates lands somewhere near $200 million a year. They're the second biggest donut chain in the entire country, behind only Dunkin', and out west, in California especially, nobody is even close. At one point, there are more than 460 Winchells in the state of California alone. In 1971, they do something that tells you how confident they were. They buy back all of their franchises and take every single shop company owned. They wanted total control of the machine, and they spread way past America. Winchells shops open in Japan, in Korea, in Spain, in the Philippines. Out in Guam, there's a Winchells on a pier in Newport Beach, salt air and surfboards, and a pink box. And there's a Winchells near a naval base halfway around the world, where some homesick kid from Ohio in uniform is getting a taste of home at midnight. They leaned all the way into the all-night thing, harder than anybody. About 70% of the sales happened before noon, but it was the overnight hours that became the legend. The cops with their cruisers nosed up to the window, the night shift nurses, the truckers, the teenagers with nowhere else to be. And here's a piece of it that a lot of people forget. That whole cops and donuts thing everybody jokes about, a big part of it started right here, on lots exactly like these. In the middle of the night, a Winchells was one of the only businesses open, brightly lit, with a clear line of sight to the street and a fresh pot of coffee going. If you were a cop working graveyard, it was the safest, warmest, most sensible place in town to stop. It wasn't a joke. It was just the only light on. And the single busiest day of the entire year, believe it or not, was Halloween, when they'd move decorated donuts by the truckload. There's even a stretch where a Winchells out in Pasadena helped build what they called the world's largest donut, a thing that reportedly weighed around 5,000 pounds. This is it. This is the summit, 1,000 shops, $200 million a year, the light on all night, on corners, in a dozen countries. And if this is bringing something back for you, if you can actually smell that shop right now, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next brand we dig up. Because now I have to show you the two guns that were already loaded while everybody was standing on top of that mountain. And neither one had anything to do with donuts. Remember gun number 1, the Denny's merger. Here's why it mattered. As long as Vern Winchell himself was the man in charge, the donuts came first, because the donuts were his baby. He was a donut man. He watched those fritters like a hawk. But something happens when your donut company becomes just one division inside a much bigger restaurant company. You stop being the main event. You slowly turn into the cash register that quietly funds everything else. And that brings us to gun number 2. In 1980, Vern Winchell steps away from running the business for good. The founder walks out the door. And this is the quiet one, because there's no explosion when it happens. The one person who actually cared whether the light stayed on is just gone. What's left behind is a company full of people who care about the number on the spreadsheet, not the door on the corner. Gun 2. Loaded, sitting right next to gun 1. And here's the human twist. Because Vern's own life goes in the complete opposite direction of his company's, this guy takes his money and reinvents himself as one of the most successful racehorse breeders in the entire country. His very first horse years earlier was actually named Donut King, and it pulled off a huge upset at a big New York race, and was nearly a Kentucky Derby favorite before an infected hoof scratched it right before the race. Over his life, Vern breeds dozens of stakes-winning horses. He co-breeds a horse with Ronald Reagan. He owns a farm in California, a farm out in Kentucky, and a big house in Las Vegas. And in 2002, at 87 years old, Vern Winchell dies of a heart attack after collapsing on the treadmill in his own home, still working out every single day well into his 80s. He walked away rich. The company with his name on it does not get anywhere near the same ending. Hold on to that, because it's coming. Now, gun number 3. And this is the big one. This is the one almost nobody ever talks about, because everybody would rather blame what comes later. In the 1980s, big business fell in love with borrowing. The short version is this. You buy a company using a giant pile of borrowed money, and then the company itself has to spend years paying that debt back. Denny's got caught right up in exactly this kind of thing. And to deal with all of it, in 1986 they carve Winchells off on its own and float most of it onto the stock market, raising about $84 million. On paper that sounds fine. At that point, Winchell still has around 740 shops, and it's still the number 2 donut chain in America. But now the donut chain is carrying debt. And debt does not care about your apple fritters. Debt has to get paid whether the light is on or not. There it is. 3 guns. The merger that turned it into a piggy bank. The founder who walked out. And the debt that was about to make everybody in charge stop paying for the one thing that made Winchells Winchells. All 3 loaded. All 3 about to go off at the exact same time. And this is the answer to how the biggest donut chain in America starts to disappear. So watch what happens when they fire. When you owe a mountain of money and you need cash fast, you do the obvious thing. You start closing the shops that aren't printing money, and you stop spending on the ones that are. You quit remodeling. You quit advertising. And worst of all, you quit paying for the freshness and the all-night hours that made people drive across town to you in the first place. Picture your corner Winchells, the one you grew up with. One night, the fryer's cold earlier than it used to be. Then the hours get cut. Then one morning, the pink and orange sign just isn't lit anymore, and there's a for lease taped to the glass. Multiply that by hundreds of corners. In one stretch, they close 91 shops across Illinois, Minnesota, Ohio, and Texas alone. And here's the part I really need you to hear, because the timing is the whole case. All of this damage, the closures, the neglect, the slow bleed, it's happening in the mid to late 1980s. Krispy Kreme has not shown up in California yet. Starbucks is barely a thing. The fatal wound is already wide open, and the so-called killers haven't even walked in the door. The stock they sold at $18 a share crashes to under $4. They post real losses. Executives resign. Lawsuits get filed. By the end of the 80s, Winchells isn't a rising empire anymore. It's a wounded thing getting passed around a table. In 1989, it gets sold again to a Canadian company called Chateau Holdings for around $40 million. And almost immediately, Chateau turns right around and sells 263 of the shops to Pizza Hut for nearly $40 million. Read that back slowly. They sold off a chunk of the stores for almost exactly what they'd just paid for the whole company. That one move tells you everything about how these new owners actually saw Winchells. Not as a beloved donut shop that people had memories in, as a thing to strip down and sell for parts. That's Gun 1 and Gun 2 firing together, the piggy bank and the missing founder. There was nobody left in the building who loved the light. And the footprint just keeps shrinking. By the mid-90s, they're down to around 300 shops. The sales slide right along with it, $82 million, then $71 million, then down around $60 million. And this is the part that never makes the business articles. Every one of those closed stores was somebody's morning. There was a guy who ran your local Winchells for 20 years, knew your order, knew your kids' names, started your coffee when he saw your car pull in. When corporate cut the hours and stopped fixing the sign and jacked up what he had to pay for his own supplies, he didn't have a chance. He wasn't beaten by a better donut. He was quietly starved out by an owner 3 time zones away who'd never once smelled the inside of his shop. Multiply that man by a few hundred, and that's not a business decline. That's a neighborhood losing its light, one corner at a time. And now, only now, do the famous competitors finally show up, to a company already flat on the floor. This is the piece everyone remembers, and it's the piece that came last. Grocery stores start baking their own donuts right by the front door. Cheap, with no special trip required. Gas stations put in coffee and a pastry case. Starbucks turns a cup of coffee into an entire experience, and remember, coffee was half the reason you went to Winchells at all. And then, in 1999, Krispy Kreme rolls into Southern California with its Hot Now light and its lines wrapped around the building, doing the fresh donut in the window thing that Winchells had basically invented decades earlier, except louder and newer. And Winchells fights back. It really does. It brings out a warm and fresh guarantee with a little red light in the window to tell you the donuts just came out. It tests the viewing windows again. It puts express counters inside 7-Elevens and Subway shops. It launches its own coffee to go swinging at the big Seattle chain. None of it works. Because you cannot outfresh the new guy when you spent the last 15 years quietly cutting the very thing that made you fresh. The light everybody remembered was already flickering, and this is exactly why the biggest chain in the country couldn't hold its own corners. Vern Winchell dies in 2002. And 2 years after that, in 2004, the company is sold one final time to a smaller California rival called Yum Yum Donuts, which still owns the Winchells name to this day. And here's a detail that just aches once you know the whole story. Go back to the mid-1970s to the absolute height of Winchells' power. A refugee named Ted Ngoy comes to California after escaping the horror of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. He gets himself into the Winchells management training program, by several accounts one of the first Southeast Asian trainees they ever took. He runs a Winchells out on the Balboa Pier. He learns the entire business, top to bottom, from the inside. From the company while it's sitting at the very top of its game. And then he leaves. He buys his own donut shop. And he starts teaching other Cambodian refugees how to run one too. And those people teach more people. And on and on. Within a couple of decades, there are something like 1,500 Cambodian-owned donut shops all across California. Small, independent, family-run, sitting on corners that Winchells used to own outright. Those shops are a big part of the reason the pink donut box is the pink donut box in the first place. So sit with the irony for a second. The chain that trained Ted Ngoy got slowly out-competed by the entire movement it trained him to start. Winchells taught California how to run a donut shop. And then California didn't need Winchells anymore. So who actually killed Winchells? That's the strange thing. Nobody did. Not really. Denny's took a little, when it turned a donut shop into a cash register. The bankers took a little, when they buried it in debt and made it stop paying for fresh. Chateau took a little, when it sold the stores off for parts. The grocery stores took a little. The gas stations took a little. Starbucks took a little. Krispy Kreme took a little. Ted Ngoy's 1,500 donut shops took a little. Nobody killed Winchells. They each just took a little. And one morning somebody looked underneath the whole thing and realized there was almost nothing left holding it up. Today, Winchells is still around. Barely compared to what it was. But it's real. Something like 170 shops, most of them in California, a handful scattered through Nevada and Colorado and a couple of other states, a few franchises still hanging on out in Guam. A lot of them are still open 24 hours, still calling themselves the home of the warm and fresh donut, still handing you 14 when you order a dozen. And if you find one late at night, it's almost eerie. Because that pink and orange sign is still glowing on the corner at 2 in the morning, exactly the same as it did 50 years ago, back when there were 1,000 of them, and Vern Winchell was standing in the window watching the fritters. The light is still on. There's just almost nobody left who remembers that it once lit up half the country. So tell me, which Winchells was yours? What corner? What city, and what did you order? The apple fritter, the buttermilk bar, the maple bar, or something they don't even make anymore? Settle it down in the comments, because I want to know who out there still remembers the one with the light that never went off. And if you want more of these, the brands that were everywhere and then somehow weren't, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.